Welcome, everyone. We will just wait a few more seconds for more participants to join. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fourth and final day of the Leadership Energy Summit Asia 2020. First and foremost, let me introduce myself. My name is Arina Shahril, and I'm part of the MBA for Working Professionals class of 2021 at Asia School of Business. And I will be your MC for today. So for this day, we will be deep diving into the theme of leadership, specifically exploring on how we should maneuver certain aspects of leadership styles to inspire others, increase team productivity, renegotiate effectively in moments of crisis, and also finding out where we are in terms of our leadership journey. These topics will be very useful for many leaders, especially in times of the pandemic. We have an amazing lineup for today. Our first speaker is Dr. Bruno Verdini. He will invite us to explore how to renegotiate in moments of crisis, empowering through trust and foresight. An expert in conflict resolution and decision making, he leads award winning research at MIT and the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. A recipient of MIT's Darablow Award for Excellence in Education, he created and teaches two courses that have been ranked in the top 10 among over 1,000 subjects on campus for 5 years in a row. With extensive experience coaching and designing executive trainings for heads of government and CEOs across all continents, I am very excited and looking forward to the session, which will come right after this. Next, we will welcome Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud, who is the founder of Mercy Malaysia and is currently serving as a special advisor to our Malaysian Prime Minister in the area of public health. Tan Sri will be sharing with us some lessons and insights on what it takes to lead a nation through a crisis. Please join us for the session, as I can assure you that it will be inspiring to many of you. In the afternoon session, ASB Professor of Practice, Dr. Tan Tamrong Nawasawat, will bring us through the first masterclass of the day, the Leadership Energy Journey. If you agree that leadership is a journey, then come learn about its map. The session will be most useful for leaders, managers, transformation teams, and for anyone interested in boosting up their leadership effectiveness and in getting results from their teams. And after that, we will have Asia School of Business faculty member Muhammad Sabri Rawi conducting the second masterclass of the day, Storytelling for Leaders. This will be an interesting session as he will be sharing his tips and best practices on how leaders can use storytelling as a mode to inspire listeners. Very excited for this session. And finally, we will close off the day with a knowledge to action panel. So without further delay, let's welcome our first speaker of the day, Dr. Bruno Verdini, on the topic of renegotiating in moments of crisis, empowering through trust and foresight. Welcome, Dr. Verdini. We are really glad to have you here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Arina, for the opportunity to join you on the fourth day of these really rewarding and riveting conversations that ASB has coordinated and fostered. I'm certainly really grateful for the opportunity to join you in your home and to start the day by expressing to you and your loved ones all the blessings as we've navigated the pain, the sadness, and the tragedy of this pandemic around the world. And my hope is that we can have throughout the day conversations that light our paths and that give us hope about what's to come if we actually build bridges and collaborate and work together. I want to be clear in expressing my deep gratitude to everybody at ASB who for the past 2 to 3 years have invited me to join their community, from Dean Fine to Associate Dean Loredana, Salina, Abigail Tile, Jeffrey Saini, and I could take an hour just describing how heartwarming and engaging the community truly is. World class, no doubt, not only in terms of the benchmarks of excellence that they establish, but in the human relationships that they foster with their students and with all of us who are fortunate to collaborate with them. Today, my conversation with you is centered on the research that we're currently heading at MIT, focused on how to renegotiate in moments of crisis. My goal is to invite you into a coaching session in negotiation. That is to lend you, to present the floor, to give you a guide, a perspective, to nurture your vast experience as an audience, as learners in this field, and therefore I'll present some insights and then open the floor for a Q&A where you can present any theme or question that is relevant to you in your own path, personally or professionally, centered on negotiation, and on the basis of it all, we'll try to together come up with significant answers. Let me, for that process, first do a quick screen sharing to give you an overview of what's to come in our conversation today. The main element that I'm going to be trying to discuss is a transition from suspicion and myopia in terms of how a lot of people attack negotiation, envision negotiation in real life, both personally and professionally, and what is the process that leads us to a space of trust and foresight. And in order to have this conversation with you, I'll start by trying to invite you to think about negotiation perhaps differently from what we traditionally envision. You know, negotiation is an activity that is anchored on communication, decision making, getting on the same page. And what's important in these scenarios is to question perhaps what are traditional images that come to mind based on popular culture around negotiation. And when we do studies on that front, what we discover is that a large number of people have a very combative negative association with negotiation. It's a perspective of trying to pull one over somebody else. It's a perspective of a fixed pie. It's a perspective of somebody has to lose and somebody has to win. And the way that presents a challenge is as follows. Imagine that you're trying to build a puzzle. You buy the box, you buy it with your partner, you open the box, you have an idea of what's the image of the puzzle that you ought to build. You have a sense of what's the number of pieces. You sit down in your favorite table and you start to scramble the pieces, try to have a strategy about how you're going to try to put the different sides together. Now, the challenge with approaching negotiation out of suspicion and myopia is that is from a place of fear, it's a place of confrontation. And so you're likely to see soon enough as you're trying to build a puzzle that some pieces are missing. But you don't know if they're missing because the manufacturer made a mistake, because your partner is trying to hide them, because they fell under the table, or because for some reason they are lost. And so you start having a drain of your energy and your focus in terms of what to prioritize, what to emphasize, how to navigate the situation. Imagine, however, if you envision negotiation completely different. That is, not only did you question why do we depart from mistrust, but actually you embrace a different view, a view that is not combative. And so that's the discussion I want to have with you, because you think in a puzzle, you have a picture of what you want to achieve. And it seems, therefore, that the outcome is predetermined. So the way I present it to you, the challenge of mistrust is that I might be missing some pieces and I might be drained. But in negotiation, in addition, the end goal is a transformation that is from the conversation that you're going to have with one another. You're going to recreate a future that is not yet set. It's not even trying to find the pieces of the puzzle together. It's something even more enlightening. It's more inspiring. It's almost as if you were painting a picture together. And if you are acting from a space of mistrust with one another, if you don't believe in one another, what's going to happen is that on one side you're painting with watercolors, on the other side you're painting on oil, and you miss out on the chance of really creating a beautiful Monet. And instead, you have a painting with crayons all over the place that wouldn't make it to any museum. So I'll do a share screen and kind of present the structure of the themes that I want to contrast with you. I'm seeing a little bit in some of the mentions in the chat that the sound might not be working for some of the participants. Do let me know if you would want me to do any break at any moment to ensure that logistically everything is working well. Otherwise, I'll focus on what's next. The first challenge that we see in the field working across industries and across cultures is that people come into the negotiation from a place of on guard, with an armor, ready for a fight. The facsimile would be a box, getting into a boxing ring. And so sure enough, you're measuring one another, you're throwing punches, you're bluffing, you're trying to figure out who lands the first strike, you're trying to leverage your strength, you're trying to push someone into a corner, to back them up, to some extent make them lose faith, lose confidence, be defeated. That it's a competition and you're trying to impose your will. Not surprisingly, if that's the view that you have of negotiation, your mindset is going to manifest those kind of interactions in practice. And so for those of you who've, perhaps this would be the moment, harken back to a really important moment, personally or professionally, where you were reaching out to someone that perhaps you cared for, or you were within an organization, wanted to make the case to your boss or a colleague about an improvement in a path or a race, and you sat down, you prepared thoughtfully, you put your heart out, and in return, all that you received was really cold, aggressive, lacking in understanding demeanor. Harken back to that emotion, and then place yourself in that situation where the other side told you, that's how life is. Life is tough, deal with it. And question whether that's how only negotiation could be. Or if instead that's a manifestation of the fact that often people who are lazy or people who are not curious enough have decided that negotiation is like a competition, and as in a fight, one has to tower over the other. Yet that mindset is past its prologue. If you question it, perhaps what you would think about and what you discover is instead, it's all about adaptive execution, even more in a moment of crisis. If you envision negotiation instead as a dance, then you're not like in the ring solely focused on what's happening in front of you. You're actually receptive to your environment. You're responding to the melodies. You can actually respond to different kinds of melodies. Neither is really leading. Both of you are coexisting, interacting in a space, getting into a groove. There's a respect. You need one another. You're interdependent. And that therefore makes you step out of your own skin. You have to put yourself in the side of your partner and be able to thrive. Their pain, their injuries, if they're dancing with you, their hopes, their emotions, they matter to you. And as a result, you'll respond differently. You'll be able to engage with what's happening around you in a way that really does not mimic what would happen in the box ring. And so I draw these two distinctions to say, when you sit down and think about any negotiation in your life, the first marker is, am I envisioning that the two of us are rather in a dance or in a boxing fight? And how do I move away from the boxing fight into a dance? Because the cost of the boxing fight, the cost, as I highlight, of the combative behavior, is that I'm anchoring myself on my fears on competition instead of my ability to see how each other together can create a better future. So that's the first marker to contrast a negotiation that's anchored on suspicion and myopia versus a negotiation that's anchored on trust and foresight. The second marker in our field, in our most recent research, is connected to the challenge of dwindling resources. To a large extent, when you're on guard and you're preparing for negotiation for the worst scenarios, it's similar to perhaps buying all the furniture for a home that you've yet to build. You don't know how many rooms are there. You don't really know what you need. You don't really perhaps even know who's going to be living in that home. But you invest a large amount of resources with an army of lawyers, with an army of accountants, with an army of experts to strategize about the worst case scenarios and be ready for that fight, that threat of litigation that you see coming down the line. And so you've certainly invested a lot of resources that you won't be able to recoup. It's not unlike what we see often in different governments, right? There's a massive investment in preparing for the worst scenarios, mostly about war. All of a sudden, when a pandemic comes and you look at the world, most governments were actually not ready to deal with that serious crisis, but sure enough, we're always ready, it seems, to fight with one another endlessly. And we can look at across human history to come up with that conclusion. Is not a surprise. Now, what if instead of wasting our resources in preparing for the fight, instead we were focusing on abundant choices? That is, if I'm establishing the right set of values and principles underpinning our interactions, we'll be able to be more thoughtful about how do we envision the steps and the partnerships that will foster in the field to be ready for those moments of stress. If I am interacting with one another in a way that is engaging and mutually nurturing, I'm not foreclosing any avenue that I may want to explore in the short, medium, and long term, which is not the case if I'm preparing for the worst case scenarios. There's another element, the biggest predictor of success in negotiation. Across all cultures that we've seen, 70% of the success of a negotiation is predicated upon the confidence upon which you begin your interactions. It's not confidence that you'll get your way. It's not confidence that you're the brightest person in the room. It's confidence that you believe that there's a rainbow at the end of the path. It's confidence in a can-do, we can collaborate, we can create together. So again, past this prologue, your mindset has a tremendous impact in the kind of ecosystem and culture that you foster, which leads me to the third element that I wanted to highlight of the tremendous cost of negotiating in a combative style where resources really dwindle, which is those tough, sleepless nights. And perhaps here the similar story to highlight of negotiation would be, harken back perhaps in your youth, and I know that we have a lot of young participants in the audience today, many of you doing your MBA, some of you on the other side are in the C-suite and heads of government have a lot of experience, but harken back to your teenage years. Perhaps some of the first moments trying to develop a romantic relationship, and think about those stressful moments perhaps, hopefully you skip them, but where you're trying to figure out whether there's something there, there's a spark with somebody else. We might become partners, but you come at it from a place of insecurity, and the other side does too. And so all the time you're thinking, oh man, did they understand what I really meant? What did she mean when she said that? But I could have behaved differently. Should I hold back and not be that serious? Perhaps she actually wants something more casual. Well, when I called, she seemed to be stressed out. Should I ask? Should she actually get some space? If you actually, and we've done it, you film some negotiations, real life negotiations of different industries or organizations collaborating with one another, you see the same dynamic. You debrief them, you interview them in between the rounds of negotiation, and they're, as I just described, they don't understand the other side. They have a whole bunch of questions, but they don't want to ask them. They are fearful that they might walk away if they do. They're not actually revealing their true feelings. And sure enough, when you unpack with them, they say, we're terrified, we're stressed out, we don't know what to do. So my argument there would be, do we have to pick those sleepless nights? The whole point is to find who's the right partner. And that right partnership is one that is built around renewed vitality. Look back now, those of you who are fortunate to find perhaps your other half, your significant other, what's really riveting often, at least in my perspective, and I've seen it around the world, is that partnership. It's either friendship, it's either mentorship, it's either romantic. That strength comes from the fact that I can be myself when I'm with you. And I can embrace the process of transformation, of discovery, of growth together. You can highlight which are my blind spots. And I know you're coming in good faith from the right perspective. And because you can do that for me, then I can do the same for you. And that gives me the vitality, actually the vigor to go and transform myself and evolve and be agile and actually meet the world. That's why when we're in love, and that's why when we have good friendships, that's why when we spend a good time with a mentor, we feel that we're walking on clouds. And we would want also to that be the case with our partners in any kind of partnership that we foster, in any deal-making process. So that would be the third benchmark that I would highlight. The last one that I think it's important to emphasize is the idea of burn bridges. And I don't mean in the traditional sense only of foreclosing your options. That is often everybody could relate with the idea. Don't fight when you're moving from one organization to the next one and go out the door yelling and complaining about everything that was wrong within your own organization. Not only that's not constructive, but people from self-interest would say, don't burn bridges. You never know if you'll see them again. I'm not emphasizing that angle. Instead, I'm talking about something much deeper. In negotiation, if you look back at the example I was highlighting about how it's not even building a puzzle, it's rather painting a picture, it's rather an art, it's a science, but it's also an art. You want to be able to walk together in discovering what the future holds. And the only way you can do so is if you have the flexibility to change and question which are your assumptions of how that future looks like. And so you see, we're often told in the media, and our leaders often tell us when you put on TV, and I've been fortunate to be across 5 continents, and when I put on TV and I get the subtitles, I get to see the same thing over and over again. It would seem that we're comfortable with people in positions of leadership being really, really good at securing that power and wielding it to serve their own group. Whether that lifts up other groups, we are frustrated because they don't do so, but we kind of accept other groups fighting for eventually getting into that spot and doing the same. And though we often question why that ecosystem is culturally not more engaging and collaborative, we have that repetition across spheres. And so I could go with the example of burn bridges in government, but let me actually take it to something that might be more relatable. And that's you as a sports fan. How often have you been listening to a podcast or watching the recent story about your favorite soccer team or basketball team, and you hear that the general manager has been fired after many years of mismanaging the salary cap, not getting on the same page with the players, and the players asking trades to be moved to a different team? And when you hear the media discuss it, it's all about a lack of trust and flexibility. They'll say this team found itself in a corner, backed into a corner because their superstar wouldn't sign this max deal. And as a result of it, they had to do this or that trade. And then the superstar bolted, and now they're left with the bag, unlikely to be able to thrive for many years. When you peel the onion, however, and you talk, as we're currently doing with players across the NFL and the NBA, what you discover is they say, well, it's really a tough situation. Where I started as a player, when I come out of university and I join a team, I'm certainly grateful for what that means to my career. It's the start of a dream for which I worked perhaps 10, 15 years since I was really little. And what's really disheartening is that I'll sign a 3-year deal. The team tells me that they're committed to me in the long run. And then I therefore go and buy my house in Phoenix. I feel comfortable with my wife getting pregnant. And I really find the right school for my child. And all of a sudden, 6 months later, I get a phone call. And it's not even the general manager, it's the assistant, telling me that in 48 hours we've got it back and I've got to go to Charlotte because I've been traded. And all of a sudden I'm questioning, hey, what if when you actually signed me, you told me, hey, the truth, there's hierarchy of players, how we see the value that you bring to this organization. And over the next 3 years, we'll continue to explore options to get better. That might include trading you. Would you feel comfortable with knowing that? And in return, don't buy a house, just rent one. We as a team, we don't want to tell you because we're afraid that you'll leak to the press that you're available for a trade, and that will diminish your value. So that's why we don't tell you. What a bad solution to the problem. You could actually instead get on the same page and have within your agreement and deal-making process a situation where the player commits not to leak it to the press because they receive actually the benefit of knowing that they really back up their actual personal life and that you're not making long-term investments to then have the rug swept under your feet without any notice. So not surprisingly, you see in sports often an ecosystem that mimics in negotiation a message that someone has to win and someone has to lose. And that's the opposite of smart mapping. If you were actually smartly mapping the different avenues to get to that championship, you'll realize, well, success is often anchored on camaraderie, a sense of partnership, a sense of understanding that the different layers within the organization, the different levels of talent in the team, they're all on the same page during a season. If I'm on my own as an organization creating stress in both my players in terms of what the future holds for them, because my perspective is I cannot trust them with the actual information and vice versa, then the players do the same for me. We're talking with Rich Paul, the agent for LeBron James and so on. Well, what happens, the final outcome is indeed that both sides mistrust one another, and it's all about who in the short run can take advantage over each other. It's not a process that actually enlarges the pie, it's actually one that costs jobs endlessly and reduces the opportunity for success. So my main message, and hopefully what I want to emphasize is, in moments of crisis, all the traditional behaviors that undermine effective negotiation are 10 times worse and more costly. Because you need to be able, in the partnerships that you have in real life, to pick up on the phone when something shuts down, when the chips are on the line, and to be able to speak truthfully with the other side about what you really need. And if you did not get on the same page, if you not establish a common ground, if you don't have clarity about which are the principles, which are the criteria that allow you to be on the same page, you're not likely to move fast enough to get ahead of the curve. And so during the pandemic, what we're seeing is those industries, those activities where people were able to be on the same page on the values, there was a sense of trust with one another, they were much more ready to thoughtfully think, how do we redefine our benchmarks? What do we need to rethink about what does it mean to win within the pandemic? And in addition, they were able to not only address the COVID-19 crisis, but also perhaps deal with issues of social justice, deal with issues of political innovation that were necessary within the quarters of their organization. Instead, in those quarters where the relationship was one of combative behavior, of dwindling resources, of lack of trust in one another, what you have is a lot of time wasted and a lot of lack of policies and solutions that were there, a low-hanging fruit if you had only envisioned that you could rely on one another positively. So that's mostly what I wanted to emphasize today. I have a lot of examples that I would like to unpack based on the questions that you bring from different industries, But this, in my case, would be the overall message that I wanted to share with you today. And ready for the Q&A that can start right now. I'll click it right now, and we'll go from there. Let me just stop sharing the screen. First question. Okay. How do you negotiate with your boss or your teacher, someone who has complete authority over you? It's unclear if this question is about a moment of crisis. I hope it's not. Hopefully you're not negotiating with your teacher about a grade, and hopefully your teacher didn't set it up so that that's when you have an interaction with one another. But if you're asking about how do we go about negotiating hierarchies in a moment of crisis, what you want to be able to do is differentiate to some extent what it means to deal with a hierarchy in negotiation. That is, you will need to first ask to differentiate, what is the relationship that you envision? What does it mean to have a boss or a teacher? You say someone who has complete authority over you. So complete authority over you would be a contradiction, perhaps, to what I'm trying to emphasize needs to be part of the relationships that we foster in negotiation. Because you see, when someone sends you on behalf of them with a mandate that has no maneuvering room, no flexibility for you to question it, then they're not relying on you as an asset, as a collaborator. You're literally just being a messenger, in which case the organization is not relying on you in a way that is effective. In the same way that if you're a teacher and you're engaging with students, you have to go beyond that, well, we both learn together while we are together. It's much deeper than that. You have to really be willing to transform your assumptions about your own field, about what you're teaching, on the basis of what you see is happening in front of you. So a big challenge with hierarchies in terms of negotiating moments of crisis is that at the top, they have a view of what's the final outcome. Literally, like I said with the example of the puzzle, they bought the box, they have the view, and they're committed to achieving that view. Yet, negotiation is not about imposing that view. It's about creating one together with the information that you don't yet have. So if you're sent, if you're an ambassador for your organization, they have to send you with humility about what is their perspective of how the future looks like. They have to be rather, we've prepared, these are the scenarios we see. But if you unearth from those good faith interactions that we have blind spots, by all means, come and tell me as your boss, as your teacher, that we can improve upon these behaviors. And so the commitment is when you're negotiating, the first thing is try to foster organizations where you literally make the question and emphasize that you need to be able to contrast, change, transform the mandate that you've received. Don't accept, if they send you to a negotiation, a clear-cut definition of what's the outcome that you need, because that means that you're not being given the wings to fly through your negotiation process. I hope that to some extent helps answer the question that you highlight. Let me see. The next question is, how do you change the behavior of those with a combative mindset or want to win at all costs at all times? And should they remain in the team? Two different questions. In the field, we often discuss, and there have been many books that say, focus on the problem, not on the people. And then sure enough, then later research show, but sometimes the problem is the people. The reality is that you can't know necessarily ahead of time whether someone is willing to transform their demeanor or their behavior. To some extent, this is a larger spiritual question in terms of how we see life. There's a lot of souls, a lot of people who feel comfortable with keeping the same demeanor across decades. Many reasons are explanations they find for that. And instead, many of us actually embrace looking back and realizing that who we were 5-10 years ago is no longer the case. We can be proud of who we were. We've embraced that process of transformation. So, most research in the field is quite direct on this point. Most effective negotiators need to be able to put themselves in other people's shoes but not in a, it's not a matter of strategy. It's a matter really of demeanor, of the kind of ability to really step into the role and advocate on the merits for what that side of the world looks like. And so what I've seen, the most advanced organizations, what they do is they'll do a little bit of role play simulations. They'll do cutting edge negotiation exercises, and they'll allocate roles within the organization and include roles for the people that you might see actually in the real world, whether you're someone from your manufacturing chain, someone from the government regulator, and so on. And they track those behaviors and they see who, in a moment of confrontation or conflict, tries to impose their will aggressively through the traditional hard bargaining. And then they, on the basis of that filming, they actually entrust to those members to stay rather in the research team, and they send instead the people who are really flexible to the negotiations, because the hard bargainers might get you a deal in the short run in at the table that meets the numbers that you care about, but the implementation side of the equation and the costs that in the long run you'll see from the desire for revenge are too large, and organizations that are smart enough try to avoid them by realizing there's no need for that level of boxing. There's no need for that level of punching. You can make your case more effectively when you can be persuasive and showcase that the package that you have at the table is really empowering for the other side. So you need to be open to persuasion. That's what makes you persuasive. Let me see more questions here. How do you negotiate with your subordinates? Oh, it moves a little bit. So how do you negotiate with your subordinates when they don't have the trust and don't walk on the same page as you are? I strongly believe, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's a complete agreement in the field. So that's my perspective from what I've seen in coaching in high stakes situations, is that you model in every interaction that you have in your daily life what kind of values and energy underpins you. And people soon enough can read, whether they are your colleagues, whether you call them your subordinates, whether you really believe that there's a hierarchy between you and the others or not. And there's a hierarchy, and it changes across cultures, that will lead to certain dynamics that might be different if they felt that is really horizontal. What you to some extent want to see, and what we've seen is most effective within teams, is you want to be able to differentiate through your demeanor and the example that you set, in the reciprocity that you have with them, in the kind of relationships that you foster, in the way you speak to them, that that there's nothing in your interactions that is predetermined. Everything is earned. That is, everything is earned, and therefore their incentive is to be the best version of themselves, because if they are, they'll be celebrated and empowered. You know, what you don't want is the people working for you to know that you'll capture their hard work at the moment of the negotiation. That you'll be the big boss, the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you'll show up at the signing and do all the interviews while the people below you are the ones who negotiated for a year and a half the deal. Because the reality is that the people below you, they'll resent that. And what's worse, then they might mimic that same behavior moving forward. Instead, you want to showcase that you embrace the hard work and that you allocate the success, so that they can feel that being on the same page is an equal distribution of the success and the effort that you put on the table. Now, of course, as we know, there are a lot of people in positions of power that don't follow this example, but for every organization where they can thrive in spite of that leadership model, there are 10 others that really thrive because actually the leader is able to set the example that I mentioned, the right example. Let me see. I appreciate the kind words. How do we natural instinctive tendencies to protect ourselves irrationally and fall back to combative negotiations? So how do we navigate, I say? what are the fears that we should reflect on frequently in order to avoid the negative externalities they have? This is a fantastic question. There used to be and it's a quite well-known story that Einstein said, and it's that he thanked the universe more than 100 times per day. What a surprise! Not a surprise, I sense, and many authors have said it too, that Einstein was the conduit for so many discoveries, that to some extent the universe revealed so much wisdom through him. And his argument was, I am grateful not only for the people in science and in physics and so on. He was talking about grateful for the fact that I can go to the bathroom, wash my hands. I'm grateful for the roads. I'm grateful for so many different things. That is a level of awareness of the wondrous surroundings that we actually have. Certainly all of us, I think, during the pandemic, God willing, that's the case, we've become even more conscious of what a unique time in history we live in, where for a large swath of the population around the world, it is normal, it is natural, it is feasible to envision that from a few moments to the next, I might be able to be in a completely different country, and all I need to show is a piece of paper, a mini booklet, a passport. And I can click on a video and listen to the entire music recorded across history without even needing to pay. That is, we have an incredible time. We live in an incredible time. And yet, we're often anchored on our fears. Our societies and our leaders find relentlessly ways to act as if we cannot get on the same page, as if it was impossible to get on the same page. But in reality, you ask about what fears, they're banking on our fight or flight natural reaction. They want us to have in quarters because that, for people who are less curious, for people who are not able to imagine that we can thrive together, that's the only way to keep themselves in power. And certainly they mimic that vision. And nobody's going to move them out from that perspective, because in negotiation, that happens often in the coaching that I need to do. People who tend to be more empathetic, people who tend to be more understanding, people who tend to be more forgiving, they take a step back. And sure enough, therefore, those who have the largest ego, who boast more, who want to be front and center, and who are less receptive to the larger context, are the ones who end up with positions of power. Well, then, of course, they're terrible about using that power to lift others. How could they? They don't even know to do it even at home. So as a negotiator, your job, if you're someone who's empathetic, is to take the step and argue against the view that that's a weakness. If you're someone who's able to really care for one another, highlight that that's a strength, and push people who don't have that ability, name it. Name it as a lack of curiosity, as a lack of imagination, as a lack of strength, as a lack of ability to be able to be comfortable with not having all the resources for you. That's really wisdom. And that's why when you often inquire and talk, for example, with people who became saints, they look at us, normal plebeians, and they're surprised by the troubles that we create in our communities. How is it possible that we cannot get on the same page? So I think that would be the main benchmark on which I would focus on. Let me see what other questions are here at play. Some of these questions are really spicy. What can you suggest in terms of ideas to build trust in multi-level environments to promote resilient communities? Well, I think on this front, my main message is to give you an example, literally from the environmental field where I have a lot of experience. A lot of my work with MIT Press, my book Winning Together, is really focused on relationships centered on ecosystem restoration, particularly in transboundary river basins. And what we see is that for many decades, traditionally, nonprofit activists really engage into a confrontation with government regulators and with companies that they believe, sometimes with a lot of history and data backing it, that the stakeholders really are not taking the right steps to protect the environment in a way that will make it feasible for the next generation to enjoy it. And they thought that by going to litigation, by engaging in internal fights with one another, they'd be able to eventually get the government to move in a certain direction. And what happened more often is that, well, the companies lobbied government, they had deeper pockets, and that they were able, therefore, to ensure and keep the ecosystem tailored to those who had the most resources. So eventually, and I'll give the example, for example, the Colorado River Basin, what they realized, the nonprofits, is, well, our advantage is that unlike the governments on both sides of the border, as nonprofits, we look at the basin as something that has no borders. What works well in terms of invasive species against native species, what works well in terms of ecosystem restoration, does not care about borders. And therefore, the way we need to propose solutions has to be in a way that dovetails with the larger interests of the stakeholders at play. So here, an example that's been successful when I've spoken even on TV is what the nonprofits realize is they couldn't get enough funds to invest on ecosystem restoration until they did the studies where drug traffickers crossed the border along the river basin, and they realized that because the ecosystem is so dry, the traditional native species, which are very very low and don't allow you to hide during the night behind them, they had disappeared, and they had been substituted by invasive species, which are taller, but use actually more water. So that makes the cycle of drought worse. And those taller bushes allow the drug traffickers to hide. So they went and knocked on the door of the Border Patrol and enforcement agencies, and they said, you know what? For a very small amount of investment, you could actually invest on removing all the invasive species, plant the seeds at the right moment of the year where pollination actually will increase and multiply, substitute therefore by native species, we use less water. In the long run, that will lead to what we want, ecosystem restoration. But in the short run, what you want, government, which is to control and fight back this terrible scourge of drug trafficking, you can do it because they no longer will have the bushes under which to hide. Very easy solution. So it's when you see it from the perspective of the other side that you can really be transformative. And it's often a low-hanging fruit. They had to invest far less in persuading him with the data about how the native species are much better than the invasive species than if they had gone through litigation trying to get the funds from another government project to invest more in ecosystem restoration. I'm aware of the time. We have 5 more minutes left. I want to make sure that I get to some other questions. By now there are so many. Negotiation is a skill that needs to be sharpened regularly to get better. Any quick tips to excel in this skill? No doubt about it. The first step would be to have children. No better negotiators. They don't take no for an answer. I don't say it from experience. I say it from everybody around my ecosystem of friends and family who had children. They are literally working 24/7 in their persuasion skills. And sure enough, you see the consequences of lying and mistrust. Perhaps it sounds expedient in a certain path to try to bully, not bully, but try to convince your child by force about a certain outcome. But in the long run, that's too costly. A, because as good negotiators, they keep asking why, and B, because they take you at your word, and therefore they want to enact the very same argument that you gave them and try to play it against you. So that's one way to keep your skills sharpened. The second would be negotiation skills are all about authenticity, knowing what's your moral compass, questioning which are your blind spots, being curious about other people, engaging, learning from them. So it's a set of activities that have no connection with what social status you have, what kind of professional background you have. It's completely in your hands, your ability to sharpen that. Because good negotiators are those, first of all, they know that their biggest asset is their reputation, their ability to be known for holding the ground for the stakeholders and the constituents they represent, but also for the empathy and the ability to write this victory speech for everybody on the table on the merits. And the only way you have to do that is if people can trust you. You don't need to be trusting. You need to be worthy of trust, trustworthy. In order to achieve that, people have to be able to read you. And they have to be able to read you, not in terms of the ideas, but in terms of the values that you bring to the table. And that's completely in your hands, and you can practice it at home, with friends, with partners, and at work by really forging and mimicking the kind of world that we want to have. That's what I would say is the key. Let me see, I might be able to ask a couple more questions. Uh-huh. How do we navigate an environment where one party has more support or more network, but is less transparent? This situation then leaves the other party who is more transparent, having less networks and shortchanged and blindsided. I think to some extent, this is a good way to go back and have a corollary of the story that I'm trying to make. In the field, some 20, 30 years ago, the big transition was to make the case that, of course, it doesn't need to be win-lose, it can be win-win. And sure enough, in my career, I've often sat down with people, for example, in real estate negotiations, that I know they're lying to my face. They really don't care about my well-being, they showed it, and they still tell me that it's a win-win. So evidently, they've not been able to internalize, because to some extent, if you really dig deeper, a bit the argument of win-win is often that it's in your self-interest to try to enlarge the pie, then fight it off and divide it. But we can take it up a notch, and I think that's what the pandemic showcased in terms of the societies being able to face it effectively. You need, and climate change is certainly a subject discussed a couple of days ago by Professor Sturman and Professor Renato, and it's certainly key for many of the participants here today. The kind of challenge that we're facing in the coming decades, they require a level of agility, a coordination of data and stakeholders, an ability to be persuasive on political grounds, a confidence to go through transformations in these locations economically that can be achieved if all the time I'm telling you things that are not true. And all the time I'm also assuming that my worldview is the only one that is correct. And if you have a faux pas, you should be canceled. We have to find rather a different way to look at the relationships that we foster. And the only way to do so is to rethink our mindset. It's not only win-win, it's rather embracing that as a negotiator, you have a larger responsibility. It's not only can I advocate for what's meaningful for me personally and professionally, and therefore for my organization. I'm an advocate what's important also for the organization on the other side, but can I actually have the mindset that I care about what's meaningful for the larger community I belong to? I mean, unless we have that view, we can't have the creativity, the planning, the commitment, the foresight, the trust to come up with new solutions. And so it's not surprising that the organizations that really are embracing transformation are the ones that will hold the future. And those that are anchored in a view and a fixed mindset of how the world should look like, they are likely to be overrun by force or just by not being able to meet the challenges of the day. What's sad, though, is that lives are constantly at stake when we leave in the hands of negotiators and leaders that mindset as if it's acceptable. It should not be wherever you are, at home, at work, and in society. Don't accept from your leaders anything but a commitment to creativity, to getting on the same page, to building common ground, to really genuinely putting yourself in other people's shoes. And if you do that, we can build a larger network that is transparent about the challenges we face, and we can light up the world and be more inspiring with one another. May God bless you all, and thank you very much for sharing today some time with me.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Verdini, and of course to our participants for those great questions. That was such an eye-opening session and personally really insightful for me. I have to admit, many times at work or, at home, especially in times where I'm put in a situation where I have to negotiate, I think most of the time I do put on that combative behavior. So this would be something that I would definitely need to reflect on. So thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to your class in a couple of weeks. And we'll definitely be using some of the insights and frameworks that you've shared today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Arena, for the opportunity to collaborate with you for this talk, and again to ASB and everyone who came to the talk today. May you really find in your heart the strength to be the best version of yourself, and believe in it, and see the transformation all around you.
Thank you. Okay, so next, we will have a short break and resume the session back at 11. We will be joined by Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmood, the founder of Mercy Malaysia, and who is currently serving as a special advisor to our Malaysian Prime Minister in the area of public health. The session will be moderated by ASB's Chief Business Development Officer, Zalina Jamaluddin, and the topic at hand will be lessons from flattening the curve. I also want to take this time to let everyone know that we have included an evaluation link in the chat box for participants to give us feedback on the session. Meanwhile, also just for your information, we are having a promotion on Asia School of Business Executive Education Program. So please do check it out. The link is also provided in the chat box. Lastly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. As ILIA sponsor, we have Maybank, Platinum sponsor Sarawak Energy, Associate sponsors CX Technology, Lawrence S. Ting Foundation, and Ancora Foundation. This event wouldn't have gone through without your support. Thank you. See you again at 11.